Well, hello everybody. My name is Jason DeCosta, and I thank you for joining me today for another episode of Consistent Preterism. Today I'm going to be doing a very brief talk on a just judge, okay, and God being just. Now, most people that are ignorant of the Bible story and who just take tradition at face value and just believe it because, why else would they put any effort into it, don't have any clue that the law of Yahweh was only given to his covenant people. The Bible goes out of its way to make sure that the reader understands that Yahweh gave his laws to nobody other than Israel, no one else. Okay, if you're looking for a quick reference point, and again, there's dozens of passages, but the one I always like to use is Psalm 147 verses 19 and 20, which say, he declares his laws to Jacob, his statutes and judgments to Israel. He has not done this with any nation. And as for his judgments, they do not know them. So it's sort of like this picture of God revealing his laws and his judgments to Israel and Israel alone. And he hasn't done this with any other nation. He didn't give his laws to anybody else, right? Amos the prophet said it. He said that of all the families of the earth, God only knew Israel. So there's an essence of God revealing himself through the law, through his righteous standard to Israelites and nobody else. And of course, there's confusion based upon some statements that Paul makes in Romans 2 about the law being on the hearts and things of that nature. But if you followed me, you know exactly where and how those fit in. God is not going to declare that he gave his laws to nobody but Israel and then surprise people and say, surprise, it's actually on your heart. You're in deep shit. That's just not how it works. The ones who had the laws on the hearts were also Israelites. This was established back with Moses when he told the Israelites that they were to write the laws of God on their hearts and on their minds and keep them close at heart. They were supposed to be everything to the people. Isaiah the prophet spoke of the Israelites when he said, you people in whose heart is my law. King David made many statements which show that the covenant people had the laws of Yahweh in their hearts. Jeremiah the prophet, when speaking of the new covenant he made with the people of Israel at the return from Babylon, said that God would establish a new covenant with the two houses, and he would write his laws on their hearts. Hebrews 8, when referring back to that same picture, refers to it again, and still, yet again, it's only the two houses of Israel that are said to have the law on the heart. So the law on the heart is nothing different. It's just another way of saying that the Israelites had the law, and it was to be of utmost importance to them. And I just did a recent teaching on that maybe a couple weeks back on my YouTube channel. If you want more, please go check it out. But today's topic is on a just judge. The word just in terms of judgment means fair, right? It means to judge fairly, to be fair. It means to judge reasonably and fairly. So if God didn't give his laws to anyone other than Israel, but yet he's going to judge people based upon an imaginary code of laws that nobody knows, that nobody even has a clue that they have, then how just can God really be? How fair can God really be? Let's put it this way. I always give the example of the time that I trekked through the Himalayan mountains in Nepal. This was a couple years ago. I did a week-long trek through the Himalayan mountains, and it was quite exhausting and taxing and brutal in the sense of, where you slept and what you ate, and it was roughing it. And, it was awesome, though. At the same time that it was challenging and mentally demanding and physically demanding and one of the toughest things I've done, it was also very rewarding because you prove to yourself that you can do something extraordinary like that and push your body to the limits. Well, the point that I want to get at here is that these Nepalese people that were our Sherpas and our guides, you'd sit in these little, villages, if you will. They're barely even that. They're just, a couple buildings in the middle of the mountains. And you'd talk to them at night, and they'd tell you things about their culture and about the people. And one of the things I remember, this guy that was our main tour guide, our main Sherpa, his name was Krishna, like the god of the Hindu people. I believe it's Hindu people. But anyways, he would tell us about some of the weird things in their culture. And one of the things was that in the Nepalese culture, if you cheated on your spouse, it was culturally acceptable that the one who was cheated on could kill the one who cheated. And he actually told us that he had some friends that were in jail currently because they killed people. They killed people who cheated. So there was the idea was that marriage to them is so sacred that, any form of breaking that bond is acceptable. Death is acceptable. Murder is acceptable. Now, of course, the government, whatever structure they have, puts a penalty on it, and it's not very much. I think he said some of his friends spent like 5 years in prison for killing someone. So, but the point is that these people in whatever, area that he was from, they viewed murder as acceptable and okay, right? They weren't condemned in the heart. They weren't, they didn't have like this moral heart law that told them this is wrong. They just accepted it as, something that was reasonable, considering that the spouse went ahead and broke that most sacred vow. And so that kind of like shocked me a little bit, because it's so radically different than where we're from. Now, granted, people today do kill their spouses, but here in America, we look at that as incredibly disgusting and wrong, right? I mean, that's just something that we would never think of doing, most of us, but some do. But out there, it seemed to be just common protocol, which is why not a lot of people cheat, apparently. But anyways, the point is that our moral heart law, as compared to theirs, is quite different in that matter. And that doesn't need to be said for any other cultures. I mean, cultures are radically different, right? I mean, I've been all over the world, and some of the cultures that I've seen, I've been to Indonesia, I've been to Nepal. Some of these, really strange and foreign cultures to us have some pretty incredible things that they do that we would look at and be like, that's just wrong, and yet it's right to them. So, and there's tribal people that still exist today that eat other people, cannibalism. I mean, we could go on and on and on about the differences in cultures, even today in our modern world, never mind going back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and the cannibalistic, horrific types of things that took place back then. So my point is that a moral law on the heart has way too many variables, right? It just doesn't work. And it's not in the Bible. It's just not in the Bible, right? It's in the Bible if you're ignorant and you don't know that only God only gave his law to Israel. Then sure, you can come to that conclusion and miss the whole point, like most do. But a moral heart law just doesn't work, right? And if you were to ask most Christians today what law they're under, they can't tell you, right? I mean, most Christians, although a lot of the futurists say we're not under the law of Moses anymore. They say that, actually. My parents used to say that. I remember when I was a kid, I used to hear my mom say, we're not under the law anymore. And I didn't know any better, right? You just kind of think of whatever. But now, looking at it from a fulfilled perspective, you realize that we were never under that law. That law was only for the people of Israel. That law passed away in full when the sacrificial system, the temple, the altars, the priesthood, the genealogical lines, when all of that was destroyed at the coming of the Lord in AD 70, at the end of Israel's days, which is why they were in the last days. When that was destroyed, that law went away in full. Like Jesus said in Matthew 5, every jot and tittle of that law passed away when that took place. A jot and tittle is the utmost, smallest, most minute, irrelevant point of the law would pass away when that system passed away. So everything's gone. There's no law today. But if you ask people that know that, what law they're under in this new covenant, they just automatically resort to saying the law of Christ, right? But that's not a law. There is no law of Christ in the Bible. The law of Christ was just a sort of a way that, I think Paul said it, he was sort of comparing, being under that old system and old burden and bondage of the law of Moses and coming out of that. The law of Christ was just kind of a way of describing the contrast to that old law of Moses. Right? It wasn't exactly like, Paul wasn't saying, The law of Christ means you can't eat this on Wednesdays, you can't do this on Fridays, you have to do this on Sundays, and, make sure you go to church and tithe. No, Paul wasn't saying that. So nobody knows what the law of Christ is today. Nobody could tell you what laws they have today. If someone wants to be so ignorant and say they're under the 10 Commandments today, then by all means they put themselves under the Sabbath regulations, right? Worshiping and observing the Sabbath days, which we know was part of Israel's law, part of their covenant, and passed away in full at the coming of the Lord. So there is no way around it. Furthermore, if they're going to make the argument that they're under the 10 Commandments, and that's it, then there's a lot of things that are not outlawed in the 10 Commandments, right? Drugs, right? I mean, you could do anything. That 10 Commandments is a pretty simple list if you think about it. Right, but of course they don't observe the Sabbath, and it's just a lot of problems. So no Christian can ever tell you what law they're under. They can't list the laws like the Old Covenant Israelites could. They knew their laws. They may not have obeyed them all the time, but they knew them. They could list them. And guess what? In a court of law, in order for a judge to be fair, to be just, there would have to be a law that the person who was on trial broke, right? The law would bring condemnation to the person who supposedly broke said law. And then that person would have to sit before the judge, and the judge would judge him based upon that law. But that's a fair judgment. That's a fair trial. That's a just judge. If God didn't give his laws to any other people, and only Israel had those laws and those statutes and those commandments, just like the Bible says, no less than maybe 300 times, then how is God a just judge for judging people today and judging people outside of that covenant framework? If you really think about it, it's impossible to be. Because there is no codified law system. There is no place where any of us can point to say, this is what God wants you to do and this is what he doesn't want you to do. Like I said, the best bet you got is the 9 Commandments, because nobody observes the Sabbath. But again, those 9 Commandments were part of Israel's Old Covenant law, and every jot and tittle of that law passed away. Now, am I saying that murdering is okay? No. Okay, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this story, this Israel story, is about them. Okay, and to say that it's anything beyond that is false, and it's an extreme stretch. But the point that I really wanted to focus on today was the idea of a just judge, the idea of a fair judge. If we don't have any law that we can physically point to and say, okay, I screwed up here. All right, I transgressed his law here. Okay, I was supposed to sacrifice a turtle dove on the 1st of September, but I didn't do that, so I screwed up. I trespassed. I made a mistake, right? If we don't have a law to point to, then how is God a just judge? How is God fairly judging us, especially considering all the different cultures and different ideas and societies in the world today that all have different ideas and different understandings of what's right, what's wrong, that all vary in terms of their understanding of, what's right and what's wrong. Someone might think, killing somebody's okay, like the Nepalese people that I told you about, whereas us over here, we might think that's horrible and should never be done. Everybody has different opinions, and of course I use the murder thing because it's drastic. It's as dramatic as it can get, but there's all different levels of that, right? We may look at marrying a woman, a young girl that's super young in her teens, as being completely wrong, but yet many of the cultures in the ancient world, that was what they did, right? As soon as a woman hit maturity, whether she was 13, 14, 15, whatever it was, they were married, right? And they were taken as a wife, as a woman. So now, today if somebody did that, that's completely wrong, right? And that's the society that we live in. That's the culture that we live in. And I agree with it. Of course, it doesn't make any sense to say that that's correct. Yet in many civilizations, there were, cultures and societies and peoples that did that took very, very young women as their wives. So, is God going to where's the law that told them not to do that? Right? I mean, this is probably upsetting some people to talk about this stuff, but it's things that have to be brought forth and thought through critically, because there's no one size fits all, law here. It just doesn't work. And of course, the Bible doesn't talk about it. So an idea of a just judge is just foreign. It's just cannot work. It's impossible if God declared his laws to nobody other than Israel, because a just judge wouldn't do that. A just judge would allow the law to be known to all people and would judge all people based upon their obeying or disobeying of that law. But nobody else had the laws but Israel. And God was a just judge in the Bible, in the story of the Bible, whether you believe it to be real or not. He judged based upon the law. Paul said in Galatians 3, as many as are under the law are under the curse. They were going to be raised to stand before the books would be opened, the judge would take his seat, the court would be seated, and you have this courtroom scene that can only be fair if they actually had the law to begin with. Anyways, that's all I got for today, folks. I hope you all have a wonderful day. We'll be back another day, another time, another place, and you guessed it, another rhyme. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.